Joining me now to talk about it is Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, who maybe right now is wondering why he accepted my invitation. Senator Coons, thank you for being here. You said on the eve of the shutdown, quote, "I'm usually one of the first to walk across the aisle and say, let's find a solution, let's find a way out of it. How come not this time?"
Well, Michael, thank you. Thanks for a chance to be on, and thank you for that thorough review of the history of partisanship and bipartisanship in recent years. I'm just going to start by reminding you that as recently as 2 and 3 years ago, we had a president who was signing into law the most significant bipartisan pieces of legislation in decades. So it's not as if bipartisan deal makers and the possibilities of bipartisanship have disappeared. But this most recent election has put in place a president and a majority who are utterly uninterested in it. I regularly interacted with President Trump and his White House in his first term. We haven't spoken once since the inauguration. I used to hear from his Legislative Affairs Office, from different cabinet members in his first term. Not once in this administration. And the point you just made, that the most important focus of the Trump legislative initiative this Congress was the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, and it passed without a single Democrat, is right. And what was the most important thing that bill did? It cut taxes for billionaires and profitable companies, the most profitable companies, and it ended access to health care for millions of Americans, which is starting to take effect at the end of this year and then 2 years later. Why pick a fight over health care right now? Because the costs are finally hitting home for millions of Americans. Here in Delaware, our insurance commissioner has made it clear that the Affordable Care Act exchange, the Obamacare exchange, those rates are going up 30%. And as you said earlier, if you push the healthy folks who can still afford to be a part of that health insurance pool out of coverage, it ends the Affordable Care Act. Trump's first term was largely about trying to repeal Obamacare. As I'm sure you remember, my friend John McCain ended that effort. Now they're trying to end access to affordable health care for millions through this method. What's the consequence? All of us will have more costly health insurance. All of us will face greater wait times in emergency rooms. And as of this week, all of us are facing higher costs for prescription medications because of Trump's tariffs. I don't like a shutdown. I don't think this is good for our country. I don't think it's good for our military. I don't think it's good for compromise. But we have to see some movement towards reversing these cuts. I understand that compromise means we won't get all of them. But when the Senate Republican majority agreed with Mike Johnson, Speaker Johnson from the House, and stepped back from appropriations negotiations, I said we've got to find a moment and leverage to get back to the table on reversing the disastrous cuts to NIH and the CDC, and working together to reverse these disastrous cuts to affordable health care for Americans.
Okay, quick reaction. I think the timeline doesn't support you insofar as you're a month off, meaning when open enrollment begins on November 1st, and now the rubber meets the road in the mailbox, people are going to wake up to what Senator Coons is saying. I don't think they're there yet, and I don't think you can keep the government shut down for an additional month. Second point is, if everything you're saying is accurate, and by the way, I believe in the accuracy of what you're saying, then Republicans will be due for a shellacking in the midterm election. What's wrong with that being the way to handle this?
So waiting until insurance rates are locked in and not changeable, and negotiating in November and December, and waiting until millions of Americans suffer the loss of health care, higher health care costs, longer wait times, isn't what Democrats do, because we want to fix the problem. On the floor of the Senate, talking to a group of Republicans and Democrats this week, one of them said, "Why are you guys trying to help us fix this problem if it's really such a big political win for you?" And I said, because we don't want the American people to suffer. You're absolutely right, Michael. The right thing to do from a narrow partisan political sense is to just fold our arms and say, you wait and see. When healthcare costs go through the roof, people are going to be mad. When rural hospitals close, people are going to be mad, and we'll benefit in the next election. But I don't want to wait until those hospitals close. I just met this week with the head of the Delaware Hospital Association. They're freaking out over the costs to healthcare for Delawareans, and I want us to have a focused conversation this week that will hopefully put us on a path towards negotiating a resolution.
Okay, I watched that video, and I recommend others do it as well in your social media. I'm hoping the government reopens and these issues get negotiated, because come November, I think people are going to recognize the strength of what you're saying. Thank you for being back here. I wish we had more time, Senator Coons. Joining me now to talk about this is David Wasserman, the senior editor and elections analyst for the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter. He's recognized as one of the nation's top election forecasters. David, it occurs to me there's a new definition of moderate these days in Washington.
Yeah, that's right. Look, 15 years ago in the Senate, there were 17 states with senators of different parties, which meant that they kind of had to work together to get things done for their states. Today, there are only 2 states that have split Senate delegations, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. 15 years ago, there were 23 senators from parties that were opposite what the presidential candidate in their state won. And today, there are only 11 senators from parties won by presidential candidates of the opposite states. And so we've had this surge in straight ticket voting in just the last couple of cycles that has led to a total polarization of not just the House, which is up every 2 years, but the Senate, which is up every 6 years. And in the House, it's even more dramatic. Heading into the Obama first midterm, there were 83 members from congressional districts won by the opposite party's presidential candidate. Today, there are only 16 members, 13 Democrats and 3 Republicans from crossover districts who have any incentive to get together and get things done. So this shutdown is taking place during a very different set of political circumstances from previous ones.
And it's gotten a lot worse just in the last couple of years. If I mention the personalities, I think that sometimes that illustrates the point. Joe Manchin would be at the top of my list. Lamar Alexander would be on my list as well. I'll give you one from each side of the aisle. Just pointing to people who were like Coons, like Senator Coons, of the sort willing to get in a room and get it done. So my question to David Wasserman, knowing the complexion, the makeup of the House and Senate so well, is who can we look to now in the Senate as brokering this kind of a deal?
Well, I think we probably know how this shutdown ends. And the hint was 3 Democratic senators who broke ranks and voted to avert a shutdown. John Fetterman from Pennsylvania, Catherine Cortez Masto from Nevada, Angus King from Maine. And look, fundamentally, Democrats are a party that is inspired by some of their primary base, because I think it's absorbed a lot of previous moderates from the Republican Party to embrace pragmatism and keeping things open, whereas Republicans are a party that's more hostile to a functional federal government. Democrats want to see things stay open. And so I do think you'll see Democrats after a while fold and argue that they'll take their fight to the midterms. They do have a better chance of regaining some power, at least in the House, especially because the administration, President Trump, Russ Vought, they're just threatening mass layoffs of federal workers, but they're also targeting funding for projects in blue states. And at some point, I think Democrats are to try and claim a messaging victory that they were able to shift the focus nationally onto health care, and in particular, Medicaid cuts and the looming Obamacare cliff, which are potent issues for them next November.
David Wasserman, as always, we appreciate your expertise. Thank you for being here.